have a spy with the Mandalorians? New Rock Stars has a theory that it's the armorer, which one of you pointed out to me. And that could be true. She has been acting kind of weird. I thought it was bizarre she just handed over control to Bo-Katan. And then she did offer to take back the wounded to the ship and leave that party before they were ambushed. But I think that would just speak to a larger, very scary truth that we're seeing here, and that's that the Empire has sympathizers and therefore agents everywhere. And I think that really reflects the world that we live in today, that you're never quite sure whose side anybody is on. And it's fascinating. And this is the Star Wars content I'm looking for, although I still do wonder about the commercial viability of it. So let's discuss. And also, by the way, I think that we're clearly headed, it's no longer about these shows or individual storylines, but with the announcement of the Dave Filoni movie, his big cinematic event, everything from here on out is just leading towards whatever that's going to be. And he did say it would be the remnants of the Empire versus the New Republic, which explains a whole lot of the recent, story developments. Now, Dave Filoni, on that note, is truly a disciple of George Lucas, because just as Lucas was keen to insert political intrigue into his space fantasy, so is Filoni. I think Filoni is much better at it, but of course, fan interest will ultimately decide. Do fans want that kind of commentary in their fantasy? The Boys pulls it off, but The Boys has a whole lot of other stuff going on, a lot of sugar to help that medicine go down. And I think there's a sprinkling of sugar here, but there are long droughts where it's not even sour. I think some would argue tasteless. Because the animated Filoni-verse, by the way, which I'm now really into, but it took a while for me to get into it, and I had to want to be into it. But while it has a fierce fan base, it has always struggled with viewership, with the shows getting canceled, then revived, only in a new format like The Bad Batch, only to get canceled yet again. We never see them on the Nielsen ratings. And as The Mandalorian becomes more and more a live-action extension of the Filoni-verse, interest in this show dips as well, which I think is a troubling sign. I saw a recent critique of The Mandalorian that Star Wars overall was becoming very deep cut, that you really had to be a student of the mythology to understand and follow and get excited about what's going on. And I would agree with that critique. Because not only is that something that it's a big ask, but Star Wars isn't doing the work to help its audience keep up, it isn't putting training wheels on it, so to speak. And it's, I think, making it almost impossible for new people to jump in. And some of you might argue, who cares? Like a lot of you did with Mario. But Mario, let's see what goes on with Mario beyond just this one-time, again, event. But, if you want your stuff to be successful, you want the audience to grow, I think these things are all important, especially when you're talking about something as expansive as Star Wars. I mean, let's see. I have an example, right? So this is Commandant Hux, who is apparently the father of General Hux, as the two characters are played by the Gleason brothers. Their father, of course, just in the Banshees of Inisherin. Now, it would be almost impossible for you to pick up that Easter egg if you weren't a diehard Star Wars fan and/or watching this episode multiple times. Remember Hitchcock's rule of 3. This is a very important rule of filmmaking and storytelling. If you want the audience to digest something, you have to tell it to them clearly 3 times, verbally and/or visually, to reinforce that. I wish I had brought that up in the Mario discussion. Strangers, obviously if you're a fan, you pick up on it right away because you're looking for it, you're used to it. But for someone who's new, they need that rule of 3. Strangers on a Train is an excellent example of this. And in fact, it was the film used to teach me that rule in film school. Although I think even if they had told us 3 times that this was wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Commandant Hux, I think a lot of us still would have been like, who? Because who knows that Domhnall Gleeson's name is Hux? He's just always Domhnall Gleeson to me in the Star Wars recent films. I don't think his character ever had a compelling enough story for me to learn his name. There are other Easter eggs here, and we'll discuss some of the more important ones at the end of the video because, again, it's all starting to tie together. But before that, I want to dive back into Filoni's politics that he's injecting into this show. Now, at Star Wars Celebration over the weekend, again, it was revealed that Filoni's live-action Filoniverse movie is going to be about this faction, this remaining faction of the Empire, now revealed to be ruled by a shadow council, trying to regain power over the New Republic, which thankfully for them, as we've seen in numerous episodes lately, are shockingly stupid and inept, especially when it comes to ruling a galaxy, an empire, if you will. I think they just aren't incapable of doing it. And then there's the problem, because as the Shadow Council convened today, it was noted that there were people on every planet still loyal to the Empire. Think about that. We're not talking about officers or soldiers. We're talking about just people. And it reminded me with both sadness and fear of our own current political climate. And I would be curious, and I'm sure that Filoni, again, a student of Lucas, will dive in potentially to what makes a person decide that maybe they were better off under the Empire. I mean, this is really amazing, fascinating stuff. And as I said, scary and sad. And then, I don't know if it's the age that we live in, being an adult, or the writing and directing here. I suspect it's a combination of all three. But when the Praetorian Guard showed up, I didn't think, oh, wow, cool. I was horrified that these three fighters would gang up on Paz Vizsla, who had a son, and just kill him. They didn't even try to capture him. They killed him. And I didn't think he was killing any of those guards, because it took a couple of shots. I loved when his gun, that was an incredible moment when his gun overheated and he couldn't even use it anymore. And I was like, they seem like you just stunned them. I mean, is he killing them? But I mean, it seemed like he was killed. And I just thought that was just really horrific and cruel. And for all their pomp and circumstance and their elaborate costumes and weapons, all I could think was, who's under those masks? Who would do such a thing to another living being? And maybe that's a side effect of seeing the Mandalorians remove or not remove their masks, the soul beneath the steel. And I gotta say, the fact that I'm even thinking about this, I think speaks pretty highly for this show. Maybe not every episode, but I think when it's good, it's really good. And this is what is making me get more into Star Wars. This kind of commentary is in the Filoniverse all the time. And so to see these officers and soldiers carrying out truly dark orders, it reminded me of this is not a situation of, you or them. Paz Vizsla had been neutralized. There was no need to kill him. So to see these officers and soldiers carrying out these dark orders, it reminded me of the very real people who've carried out very real dark orders, or even just done dark acts, who I guess would be ripe for recruitment for these dark forces throughout history, including recent events today, and even just the other day. I mean, it's really amazing, and as I said, terrifying. Star Wars, at least Filoni's corner of it, as I said, is becoming as much a commentary on history and society as The Boys. And both feature Mr. Giancarlo Esposito. Yes, somehow Moff Gideon has returned. And as the Shadow Council works to get a new leader to bring back the Empire, there's Project Necromancer, most likely bringing back the Emperor, who did return in The Rise of Skywalker, as we know, or the return of Grand Admiral Thrawn, who it's now been confirmed is returning in the upcoming Ahsoka series later this year. But Moff Gideon says, what about me? Well, he does seem pretty competent, and he knows how to make an evil entrance twice this episode, and one exit. He even exited when he flew off like a Mandalorian. I was like, that's gotta hurt. Twisting the knife, Moff Gideon, twisting the blade. Those Mando blades that shimmered were very cool. But I've been to the future. And there is no Moff Gideon, and there's no Grand Admiral Thrawn, so perhaps they have a final showdown in Filoni's big movie. That's one of the problems of telling these stories out of order with prequels and stuff like that. You're like, I've been to the future, and you weren't in it. And let's hope one of Moff Gideon's spies, and I think hopefully his number 2, Aaliyah Kane, is a part of this story going forward as well. Katie O'Brien is so cool in this role. It is such a joy to see her create it. She made quite the entrance herself this episode, Blade Runner style. I loved her pop collar in the rain. She looked great. She has a fabulous androgynous look. She is super cool. I love that when she went to make her report to Gideon. Interrogation droids. That was an interrogation droid, right? Not just for torture. Side note, speaking of interrogation, did you see that they are actually developing artificial intelligence that can read people's brain waves and produce a visual of what that person is thinking? I mean, and it's very early stages, but so far it is working. They're not like, oh, well, you can't do that. They're like, oh, wow, it looks like we might be able to. I mean, talk about making our dark stories a reality. I said on the live stream, I watched Peyton Place last night, and I was thinking about, that type of America that it depicts and how much America has evolved since then and jumped forward. And we've always, speaking of movies, told stories about dystopian futures. But to see humanity actually move toward this, to move towards an evil empire, to move towards a Skynet, it just is incredible. And I don't know how much I like it, but it's happening. So we're also moving towards a Filoni cinematic event. And so I don't think this really is whose show is this situation anymore. The Bad Batch, Mando, Ahsoka, these are clearly all connected and moving towards this movie. And I will be curious to see how a movie does where you can't really follow it if you haven't watched all these shows. And to some extent, Filoni's animated shows as well. It's pretty clear if you want to watch Ahsoka, you got to watch Rebels. So I got to get on that. Thank goodness they gave us the heads up before it drops in August. But that is a lot of homework. So I do wonder about the potential box office for Filoni's movie. So is The Mandalorian really about Din and Grogu anymore? I don't think it is. At Star Wars Celebration, producer and director Rick Famuyiwa, he directed this episode. He did a great job. He said, this is really a show about Mandalorians, right? He's like, there are a lot of Mandalorians, and this is a show about all of them. But, and sure enough, Din and Grogu are fading more and more into the background. I don't like Grogu's new droid body at all. Not only do I think it's weird and off-putting to walk around in the dead husk of a droid that they knew very well, they knew him enough and trusted him enough that he was the one they wanted to bring back. They're like, oh, it didn't work. Can you hollow out his corpse so we can walk around in it? And you're like, what? It's like it puts the lotion on the skin. This is like Silence of the Lambs stuff. One of the most interesting things about last week's episode to me, besides being like a date night for Bo and Din, was that droid bar. And talking about is AI alive? Is artificial intelligence alive? And again, it looks like we'll be having that discussion in real life pretty soon. If it thinks, therefore I am, right? I mean, to some extent, Free Guy was also about that. But when Grogu is in that thing, I think it dehumanizes him, so to speak. I mean, like when you see him from far away, you see the droid. You don't see Grogu anymore. And his first words are a robotic yes or no. Those are simple words. Those are often baby's first words. How can't he not? Why doesn't he just say them? What was wrong with his pod? He was able to keep up with Din very well when they explored Mandalore and even escape to rescue Din. And as for stopping that fight, Grogu could have easily stopped that fight between the two Mandalorians using the Force instead of his new droid arms. But you know what's interesting? As Moff Gideon said that he was going to use elements from all different cultures in the galaxy to create his evolved Dark Troopers, the next evolution in Dark Troopers, borrowing a little bit from the Mandalorians, the Beskar steel. That's why that was left over and when they had liberated him from the War Council transport. But he's going to say, I'm going to take stuff from the Mandalorians, from the Jedi, etc., etc. And they even cut to Grogu. And I was like, Grogu, that's kind of what you're doing. You're kind of taking a little bit from everything and making a hero. So I wondered if Moff Gideon was truly Grogu's villain, right? Like at the end of the day, first he was Din Djarin's, then he says he's Bo-Katan's. I'm like, no, I think he might be Grogu's villain. And I wonder what Grogu will become on that same note. What will he evolve into, especially as he borrows from so many different spaces and isn't truly in one of them? And as many of you have pointed out, he would be at a good age for the Rey movie, which takes place in the future. Will Din Djarin be in Filoni's cinematic event? I don't think it's looking too good for him. Separated from Grogu and Bo-Katan, he's now captured by Moff Gideon's forces, who again, it seems, just executed Paz Vizsla. I suspect Din Djarin will either be rescued by Grogu next week or perhaps be killed. We know that he has been fading away from this show. As Paz Vizsla says, this is the way to make that kind of sacrifice, and he too leaves behind a son. Does his death foreshadow Din's? Either way, I bet Grogu speaks his real, organic first words next week as to either the father figure that he helped save or has to say goodbye to. As for Bo-Katan, with all due respect, I didn't sign on for a Bo-Katan show. And to be honest, I don't think she's a very good leader. I was surprised when she admitted that she did surrender only to be duped by Moff Gideon. I was like, not surrendering was the one thing holding these remaining Mandalorians together. And she was like, nope, that's a lie. I totally caved. And then I was made a chump out of. And you're like, I wouldn't tell people this story, Bo-Katan. I mean, you could see it on this guy's face. He was like, I'm not sure if you should be the leader. This guy, by the way, super cool. He's the coolest Mandalorian we've seen yet, and made me want everyone to take their helmets off. I was like, whoa, how many more awesome people like this are standing around me that I don't know about? And then, despite Din Djarin's very nice speech, and I do think, by the way, it harkens back to those date vibes from last week, I do sense a spark between the two of them. Maybe the fact that he never takes his helmet off is kind of hot, right? But I feel that the only real qualities that Bo-Katan has to lead are her lineage and the Darksaber. I mean, nobody was willing to follow her last week until she had the Darksaber, even though she even defeated that dude in battle. So I'm like, it's just all the Darksaber. I mean, really. I mean, she's an okay fighter. She did win her fights, although I don't know how much that was due to the writing, that she had to win. And but I will give her credit for the very impressive fleet that she put together. I was impressed by that. But how did they paint that mythosaur skull on the bottom of the ship? I'm like, where'd you even find that much paint? I did feel that this episode, the Mandalorians as a people really came together and stepped up. 3 factions united, and when they did drop into Mandalore and landed as a unit, like all like with their backs to each other, ready to go, I was like, you guys are actually pretty cool. It was like they were a whole planet, a whole tribe of Marines or special forces, and I thought that was neat. That was a good idea. As they searched the planet and the ground exploded, I was like, mythosaur? But no, it didn't seem to be the mythosaur that Bo saw. Because nobody said anything. Nobody was like, and also when they were like, abandoned ship. And I was like, if Grogu was still in his little pod, he would have been able to fly off the ship no problem. But I was like, it was like a clown car. How many Mandalorians were in that ship, actually? I was like, whoa. But I do think that Mandalore potentially is cursed. And it is now the base of operations for Moff Gideon, the man who helped destroy it, wiping it clean as a foundation for himself. Ooh. I agree that as the Mandalorians ran further into the Great Forge and found themselves in an Imperial-style hallway labyrinth, we all knew what was coming. And I must say, how the Empire is able to build a whole base like that, and armor and weapons, they're still very functional, very functional. Like, wow, I mean, it's a lot. I mean, they don't seem to be on the run at all. And the fact that they have so much support to be able to make that happen, again, that's one of the scariest things about this episode. Okay, so other Easter eggs that are important to pay attention to. The Praetorian Guard are an evolution of the Imperial Guard. There's always been this Red Guard. And they guard important figures, rulers in the Empire throughout the movies. That's why they're basically like the Secret Service. So when Moff Gideon requested them, I'm surprised he was like, I got some bad dudes after me. I'm going to need 3. He said, I need 3 Praetorian Guard. And the Shadow Council, made fun of him. And they were like, oh, somebody thinks they're going to get assassinated because, Moff Gideon was worried about his own safety. Although he did not use them in that capacity. So you would think that would be beyond their purview. They were like, Moff, you were totally safe. And he's like, do what I asked. Then, of course, Project Necromancer, I suspect, is built off of the cloning work being explored in the Bad Batch. And also in the Clone Wars originally, right? So all that other stuff took place before the OG trilogy, the original 3 movies, and Mando, of course, takes place after them, right after. Where's Jimmy Simpson as Dr. Hemlock? I was surprised. I was disappointed he didn't make a show at the Shadow Council. But the center of cloning started out on Kamino, and then as we've seen on the Bad Batch, has been moved by the Empire to Mount Tantus, which I think is probably maybe where it's still going on, right? During The Mandalorian, I would be curious, is a trip to Mount Tantus in our future? And then again, Thrawn, name dropped here several times. There's the rule of 3 for you. I heard Thrawn, boy. And he will show up on the Ahsoka show, played by the actor who voiced him on Filoni's Rebels, Lars Mikkelsen, brother of villain extraordinaire, Mads Mikkelsen. So let's see where The Mandalorian Season 3 ends next week. Again, as we take our journey, not for this show, but as a part of the greater now Filoni-verse. Because now we know where we're truly headed. And it's very much a George Lucas-style story. Very much. Filoni was very much trained, speaking of the way, in the ways of George Lucas. And we'll see if that was a good idea. I think it's very good with the faithful, but I think it does seem to not have the reach that the original Star Wars did. And even some of George Lucas's later stuff was not well received. And I hope that they are trying to maybe figure out why that was. So we'll see. I like it. Again, I'm getting into it. I'm deep in the lore. I'm like, oh, I'm understanding a lot of this. But I do worry about its commercial viability. All right, share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.